Did you know this?
Hey explorers! Brace yourselves for 25 mind-blowing facts, Velcro secrets, sea otter parenting, and more. Ready to dive into the extraordinary? But before that, like and subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an update. Let's roll. This is how Velcro looks under a microscope, revealing how nylon fabrics bond together, making this adhesive material fascinating. Did you know that sea otters hold their pups on their chest to nurse? They look incredibly cute and sometimes even fall asleep floating. The human eye has a resolution of 567 megapixels, while the camera of an iPhone 11 is only 12 megapixels. After 7 months of auditions, Tom Holland found out he had been chosen as the new Spider-Man not through a call from his agent, but by a post on Marvel's Instagram account. Like everyone else, Godzilla is trendy in 2021. However, did you know that in 2015, Godzilla became an official Japanese citizen and was named a tourism ambassador? To celebrate, a 12-meter replica of Godzilla's head was installed on the 8th floor terrace of the Shinjuku Toho Cinemas building. This is the Illuminated Pavilion in Mankora, Thailand, the world's largest open-air museum. It features over 120 replicas of famous buildings, monuments, and beautiful designs of Thai architecture. Meet the mossy frog, known for having one of the best camouflages among amphibians. When curled up, it's practically indistinguishable from a rock covered in moss. Meet the cowboy couple with Wild Thing, a buffalo weighing over a ton, as their pet. They raise buffaloes, and their pet roams freely around the house. Ever wondered how Hawaiian surfers train? They carry a 23-kilogram stone underwater, resisting the force of the waves to build strength. Watch koi fish swimming through the crystal-clear water of a canal in Japan. These artificial channels transport spring water to homes. The Nullstern Hotel in the Swiss Alps has neither walls nor a roof, just a queen-size bed with a panoramic view of mountains and stars. It includes a personal butler staying in a nearby cabin to serve guests. Was it luck or a perfectly coordinated shot? What do you think? This was an FBI fingerprint file storage room in 1944, where fingerprints were organized folder by folder in thousands of filing cabinets. Here's the Pyramid of Giza seen directly from above. The optical illusion created by the image can trick your mind into believing you're looking down a corridor inside the pyramid. Watch a scared octopus using shells as a defensive shield against an approaching diver. Meet the fennec fox, the world's smallest fox with ears that can grow up to half the size of its body. It primarily inhabits the Sahara sand and other parts of North Africa. There's a small island in South Korea called the Bang World Island, also known as the Purple Island. Structures, houses, and gardens are colored with lavender tones, making it look like it's from an imaginary world. In Warsaw, Poland, clams are used to measure water toxicity. These mollusks filter river water, and when they detect even the slightest sign of pollution, they close, triggering an emergency alarm. In 2006, a Coca-Cola employee stole the secrets of the successful soda formula and called Pepsi to offer them in exchange for money. Pepsi met with her, not to keep the information but to inform Coca-Cola of her actions. It's quite common for airplanes to be struck by lightning, as they are designed to absorb and expel the energy. If your plane is hit, the most you might notice is a flicker of lights. Oases are real. In Peru, there's one with a community living in it called Huacachina, located in the coastal desert of the southern Pacific, thanks to underground currents. In 1967, the Outer Space Treaty was established, stating that no nation can claim ownership of the moon and prohibiting the placement of nuclear weapons in space. Did you know that the world's largest beehive was discovered in 2015 in a remote forest in the Himalaya? It housed millions of bees and was so massive that it could be seen from space. In Russia, there's a lake called Lake Baikal, known for being the deepest freshwater lake globally, reaching depths of over 5,000 feet. Nestled in Siberia, Lake Baikal not only boasts incredible depth and clarity, but is also home to a unique species, the Baikal seal. Isolated for centuries, these freshwater seals have evolved distinct adaptations, adding another layer of intrigue to the wonders of this extraordinary Russian lake. Interestingly, it's also one of the clearest lakes, allowing visibility of up to 130 feet underwater. Have you ever heard of bioluminescent mushrooms? In certain forests, like those in Brazil, there are mushrooms that emit a soft glow at night, creating a magical and otherworldly atmosphere. And there you have it, a mind-expanding voyage through the unexpected. Did these 25 revelations flip your perspective? If your brain is still buzzing with curiosity, don't just watch, join us. Hit that like and subscribe button, and smash the notification bell. Become a card-carrying member of our League of the Insatiably Curious.